Hello, hello. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today for our last day of virtual programming for Face to Face 2023, though we hope to see many of you in person later this week. We're really just grateful to have you all here this morning for this session. This is Black Diaspora Representation, Intersectionality of History, Culture, and Religion. My name is Kinsey Keck. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with shoulder-length brown hair and bangs, and I'm wearing a pink tank top with a pink, white, black, and gray button-up shirt, flannel shirt over it, and my background is blurred. I am also the programming and membership manager for the New York City Arts and Education Roundtable. The Roundtable, for those of you who don't know, is a grassroots service organization that works to improve and advance the state of arts education with professional development, workshops, advocacy, and other resources to connect the arts education field. Although we are currently meeting online via Zoom, the Roundtable would like to acknowledge that we do work and live on unceded lands. Mannahatta, or the place that is also widely known as New York City, exists on the contemporary and ancestral homelands of the Canarsie, Munsee Lenape, and Wappinger people. These sovereign nations and communities are still thriving here, and we continue to occupy their lands. We would like to give a moment of respect to them, as well as to the Black and immigrant communities which have helped build the city that we know today. As we recognize that all of our pasts, presents, and futures are intertwined, I'm just going to uplift a handful of contemporary Indigenous arts organizations that we can all support and learn from. I am pasting those in the chat now, so save those links. Please do some research, get to know these organizations, support them with donations if you can. And I also welcome you to share any links and uplift any organizations that you would like to in the chat for the rest of the folks on the call today. Thank you. I also want to send a very, very big and heartfelt thank you to the Face to Face 2023 conference sponsors for their support of our 30th anniversary conference. There are so many of them. Here they are. We're so grateful to them all. But this session today is specifically brought to you by two of our sponsors. So we'd like to also thank Artworks NYC for bringing this session to us today, as well as the NYU Steinhardt Program in Educational Theater. Thank you again to our sponsors. If you'd like to learn more about them, you can visit the Face to Face website and click on the sponsors page, and you'll find links and information there. Just a few more reminders. If you're having trouble at all during today's call with Zoom, please send me a private message. My name is Kinsey. I'm here to help. Please remember to keep your mic on mute unless you're the person speaking so we can all hear each other clearly. We do encourage you to use the chat to ask questions and connect with other people who are on the call. This meeting does include live ASL interpretation, as well as automatic closed captioning via Zoom. To activate captions, navigate to your toolbar and click Show Captions. That may also be on the More button on your toolbar with the 3 dots. Then you can find the Show Captions button there. Lastly, this session is being recorded and will be made available to registrants later this week, ideally, but by early next week at the latest. So you will get that email and any other resources that we share during the call. And that is enough for me. It is my very sincere pleasure to turn it over to our facilitator today. Please join me in welcoming Régine Romain, founder and director of the WaWaWa Diaspora Center. Welcome, 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 Gigi.
Greetings. Hi, everybody. So nice to see you. It is a pleasure to see some of your faces and to be able to connect with you here. So I'd like us to begin with just some community agreements, which would be on slide 4. And the community agreements that I would like to begin with comes from my culture, right? It comes from the way in which I was raised. I'm Haitian American, and our community agreements are honor and respect, right? So there may be some things that you hear that you may question. There may be some things that you're like, what? Right? But we can respectfully and communicate with each other, and we can also honor traditions and ways of being that are new to us. Thank you. And I'd like to go in a little bit on the land acknowledgement. This is important for us to consider because a big part of the work that I am going to be sharing with you today is in honor and respect of Indigenous traditions. So I'm standing on Manse Lenape land. I'm standing on the land of Manse Lenape people. I'd like us to collectively take a moment and acknowledge the ancestral lands of where we each live today. I put in the chat a link to a site that allows you to find the Indigenous names. I'd like us to pay respects to the elders, past and present, and give thanks for the land that we call home today. It's important that we acknowledge the legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us together here today. Thank you. Next slide, please. And so I'd like us to just take a moment of grounding. I'd like us to just firmly plant our feet on the floor. If you're able to do so, I don't know if some of you are commuting and listening in, but if you can, I'd love for you to just take a moment and to ground yourself in this moment. I'd like us to take a deep breath and relax and release. I'd like us to take one more deep breath, acknowledging that we are here together, whatever it is that we are meant to do. After this, we will do whatever we didn't do before. It's already done or not done, that we are here together. And release your breath. And one more. And release. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to just acknowledge and say thank you so much to Drew Davis and the other ASL interpreter that we will have today. I'd like to begin with acknowledgements. The first acknowledgement that I would like to make is to my aunt Rosemary, Tati Rosemary. She was a big, big part of my learning about traditional African religion, specifically Vodou. Zora Neale Hurston is a great teacher. And I really learned about Zora Neale Hurston at Bowie State University, my alma mater, where I went for undergrad. And I'd like to acknowledge Nana Kwabena Brown, one of my first teachers of the Temple of Inyame in Washington, D.C. And I also would like to acknowledge Iya Oshunyo Yin Alake, one of my first teachers, an Oshun priestess in the Yoruba tradition, also about the traditional African religion within the Yoruba tradition and learning the way in which we're all connected. Thank you. And so it's important that for me to just acknowledge that things are a little, more than a little, hard for many of us right now. The country that many of us live in here in the United States is going through a tremendous shift, and there is mounting gun violence. And so I'd like to acknowledge the recent loss of children and teachers and staff in Tennessee. And I'd like to acknowledge the loss that is happening all over. And so I just would like to take a moment. We are able to gather together today, but there are so many that are not with us. And so just recognizing how can we support them? What can we do? I always try to put that forward in all of my workshops because sometimes there is a little bit more that we can do. I'd also like to acknowledge on the next slide, a phenomenal educator, Janine King, who recently passed. She passed last Monday. She was a New York City educator. She worked in the Bronx, and she was an amazing woman. And I just feel like there's a space in which, we have to be able to just recognize our educators. And so I want to do that. And I'm going to put in the chat a link for any of you who may be interested in learning more about her and also supporting GoFundMe for her family. Thank you. Next slide. So there's a poem here. I've been doing a lot of talking. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to read this poem? April is Poetry Month. And so I've included 2 poems in my presentation, and I would love a volunteer, if anyone would like, to read this poem by Mickey Scott Bay Jones. Michael. Hi, thank you. So Michael, you have to unmute, or you need to be unmuted. There you go.
Invitation to Brave Space by Mickey Scott Bay Jones. I have to move this camera so I can see the full poem. There we go. Together we create brave space. Together we will create brave space, because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We carry all scars and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. I'd like to share this poem by Mickey Scott Bay Jones because I think it's important to recognize that though we may long for a space where we feel safe and we feel comfortable, that isn't necessarily where we grow. And the conversations that we're going to have today around traditional African religion, specifically Vodou, it requires many to come out of all of the things that they've been taught. It requires for us to consider other ways of being. It requires us to move with honor and respect. And so the next poem that I'd like to share on the next slide is called Ritual in Waiting by Iya Oshunyoyin Alake. And she says, I poured libation in Brooklyn, in Weeksville, where love for each other, care of each other, and support of each other were the community cornerstones. I beg Oshun to return those gifts to us. She too tells me to wait. She says that love and fear cannot sleep in the same house, much less the same bed. But the time of courage is coming Her waterfall of wisdom whispers into my ear. Oshun says, love, love again, and then love more. Love is our legacy. Feed everyone's soul with love so it can grow in its power. And that is the work of Iya Oshunyoyin Alake. It's called Ritual in Waiting. I'd like to share the next slide. And I would love if we could put in the chat where we're from. How do we identify ourselves? And so this here is a photograph of myself at two different stages in my life. One, as a little girl visiting my family in Haiti. And the other is in Brooklyn, New York. Now, the photograph on the left, it always gets me because it always makes me feel like I was born in the early 1900s. I don't know about you, but it makes me feel like, whoa, okay. Like, you know, when was this photograph taken? And I'm so thankful for it, though. It was taken in Abrams Studio in IT. And I was visiting my grandmother, my grandfather, and being able to spend time there. I don't have a lot of memories of my grandmother, but I do remember my grandfather because I went to Haiti later. But these images help me to stay connected. All right, they're coming through in the chat. All right, let's see. Okay, Puerto Rican, Michael, I see you, Puerto Riqueño. Palestinian in Jordan, Russia, Poland, Texas, and Minneapolis from Amy. Lisbon, Portugal. Wow, living in Ridgewood, New York. Welcome. Michigan, Newark, New Jersey. Haitian representing from Brooklyn, Stanley. Louisiana. Deep California roots, Southern Brazil. Peru. Wow. Amazing. Jamaica. This is coming from, wow, Senegal, Rhode Island, Croatia. Wow, we have such a powerful community here. I just want to say thank you all for coming together and connecting with this work. If we can go to the next slide, just to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Régine Romain. I am a artist, daughter, sister, mother. I am a Brooklyn Public Library Heritage Ambassador, New York City educator, visual anthropologist, racial justice strategist, author, scholar, voodooism, yogi, and founder of the WaWaWa Diaspora Center. Okay, I think that's good. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. This is my contact information. We'll put it in the chat, but I'd like to put it early because sometimes we forget to share this information. So I like to always put it early. My website is regineromain.com. If you're interested in following me on social media, on IG, and my email is WaWaDiaspora. And if you'd like to support the work that I do around traditional African religion, the link is there for the GoFundMe. Thank you. And the next slide, please. So this is one of the projects that I have in my work. As director of WaWa Diaspora Center, we created this coloring book to honor the deceased of the earthquake in Haiti. It's called Nous Pas Oublier, a Haitian coloring book. One of the things that's really important for me in considering and thinking about Black diaspora representation is that I did not grow up with a coloring book that had any images of Black people. I was born in the early 1970s and it just didn't exist, or if it did, I didn't have it. I was born in Washington, D.C. I grew up in the suburbs of Maryland. And in 1999, I moved to Brooklyn, New York. And what drew me to Brooklyn, New York was actually the very diverse Black diaspora representation that I found. I felt at home in Brooklyn, walking down the streets of Flatbush or Crown Heights or Bedford-Stuyvesant. I saw myself reflected in the people, in the language. I could hear Haitian Creole being spoken. I could hear Spanish. I could hear Portuguese. I could hear folks from the South. I could hear it all, and it made me feel so, so very welcome. And so this is one of the images from the book, and all of the images in the book are actually from photographs. And so they're all from photographs that I took in Haiti. Most of them were taken right after the earthquake. And so I wanted to find a way to honor. This image specifically was at a Vodou ceremony. And I found the image so powerful. And so I included it in the book. Thank you. These are some of my students in Benin. I lived in Benin from 2016 to 2018. And it was while I was in Benin that the WaWaWa Diaspora Center started. I was a teacher in the middle school. And one of the things that is really key, that's really important, is that I was teaching students in Benin, West Africa, a country formerly known as Dahomey, about the transatlantic slave trade. Many of them knew the history from the African side, but they did not know what happened on the other side. And so we actually made a short film. I'll share the link with you if you can go to the next slide. Inspired by the work. It's inspired by the work of Zora Neale Hurston. Her research that inspired so many of us afterward. I don't know if any of you know the book called Barracoon, but it is a very powerful story of Kojo Kazula Lewis. And so my students and I actually took that history. We learned about what happened with this particular story. And then we learned about the Clotilde ship. There's a Netflix documentary called The Descendants. I highly recommend for you to check it out if you haven't already. This is a student film. It's not at all the same, but it's a very powerful way of engaging students with a very hard history, but allowing them to sit at the table. And so we engage them with filmmaking, with poetry, and that was what we were able to create. And it was a wonderful project. I'm very proud of my students. Thank you. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. We're not going to play it. I'll put a link in there, but we're not going to play the video. So the WaWaWa Diaspora Center. The next slide. Diaspora. The movement, migration, or scattering of a people away from an established or ancestral homeland. People who have spread or been dispersed from their homeland. An example, due to the transatlantic slave trade, the African diaspora is spread across North and South America. And that's from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Are we able to play the video?
I think that neither Alex nor I have the permission.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Baby, my Valentine. Can I get to make you what temperature is? If you leave me a good time, I swear. You are like the oxygen I need to survive. I'll be honest. Loving the thought of me, I am so obsessed. I want to chop your heart. Never did it back at this feel. Open up, make us feel. Yeah, my love, one thing. We make a bad man feel.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I just want us to just take a moment here. Did anybody see anything that surprised them? So that was a short video. And that's a short video from Instagram. And Instagram is interesting. I think there's a lot of information that you can find on there that can be useful. Besides, just wasting your time, there's actually, some good stuff on there. And so I saw that just a couple of days ago and I added it to the presentation. And I'm just wondering, for those of us here, did we know that? Did we already know the 10 largest countries where there's a presence of diasporic African people? Did we know that already? Did we know those numbers? Because for me, I've traveled many places, and I haven't been to all of those places. But one of the things that I do find interesting is that my family is from Haiti. The other side of the island is La República Dominicana. But within Dominican history and society, there's actually a continued denial of Blackness, right? Which is very interesting because it's right there in the top 10, right? In the sense of the largest number of Africans that have been forced through the transatlantic slave trade to leave their home. And the number one was Brazil. Yeah, I see in the chat that Alex says, surprise. Brazil has the largest amount of dispersed Africans. And so with that, I'd like us to consider that with that dispersal, what happened to people's culture? What happened to people's way of being? Does anyone know, for instance, in Brazil, what are some of the spiritual traditions that Africans were able to hold on to? You can put it in the chat if you know. Hi, Raisa. Nice to see you here. Thank you, Adriana. Yes, candomblé. And candomblé is basically the survival of the Yoruba tradition. What's interesting, and I haven't had a chance to visit Brazil yet, but what's interesting about Brazil and Cuba, and even some places in Puerto Rico, where the traditional Yoruba tradition survived, that because it was so sacred, because it had to be practiced often in secret, there are traditions that continued in these diasporic locations that are not necessarily practiced in Dahomey or in Nigeria. That actually the enslaved Africans that kept the tradition alive were able to actually keep it very traditional in ways of practice that were hundreds of years ago. And so I'd like to go to slide. I think well, is there anything else I need to tell you about the WaWaWa Diaspora Center? Slide 21. Thank you. The next slide. So the WaWaWa Diaspora Center, as I said, was started in Benin. And with that, we did tours. We had visitors come from many parts of the world, many of them Haitian American, wanting to come to Benin because many of us know that our families are from Dahomey. Many Haitian descendants know our ancestry because actually in the spiritual tradition of Vodou, the names of the nations were remembered, the rhythms, the songs, the ways of being. And so one of the challenges for some of the visitors, though, was actually learning about Vodou. One of my visitors that came to Benin, Christian, had been told so many things about Vodou that she wanted to visit the country, but she was very, very frightened. She was very, very frightened because of all the negative things that she had been taught. I'm going to show my short film, Brooklyn to Benin, a Vodou Pilgrimage. And I'd like us to consider a couple of things before we watch it. And I'm sorry that I'm talking quite a bit here, but I'm going to stop. I promise you, it's not going to continue. Is that there is a place in which we have to understand the history. We have to understand that enslaved people were not able to actually live their best life, right? We hear that slogan today, I'm out here living my best life. Enslaved people were not able to do that. And on a fundamental level, they were not even able to worship or acknowledge their God, their ancestors, their way of being. Many were killed, maimed, publicly beaten. Hands were cut off, all types of public displays of horror that instilled fear. And so the work that I do as an educator and as an anthropologist and as a researcher is to recognize that space in which many of us are experiencing what Du Bois calls a double consciousness. On slide 24, Du Bois says that it's a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of the world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. That is one of my favorite books, Souls of Black Folks, W.E.B. Du Bois. Learned about the work at Bowie State University. And if we can go to slide 23 before we dig in, and I see some of the comments, which I'm going to get to, but before we can look at the film and understand the relevance through the arts, I'd like us just to consider, why is this work so significant? A big part of the challenges that we have is that our systems, our public systems of education, healthcare, criminal justice, housing, etc., were not created to produce equal outcomes or experiences for everyone. These structures, past and present, maintain inequity by design. These inequitable systems were not created by accident, and they will not be undone by chance. New liberating systems must be designed with conscious intention and a shared vision for a desired future state. And that is from the National Equity Project. And so for the question that I put forward to all of you today on slide 25 is, what counters the inequities fraught within our educational system? You can come on, you can put it in the chat. What counters the inequities fraught within our educational system? What do you think? Representation. Thank you, Dwayne. Yes, absolutely. Protests. Thank you, Beth. Culture and education. Access. Centering student voices. Oh, come now. Yes. knowledge and exposure, anti-racist pedagogy, assurance of voting rights and voting access. Thank you, Barry. Dedicated individuals trying to do the right thing, boldness and courage, activism for local poor parents, access to resources, conscious work to understand, bravery. Absolutely. So if we can go to the next, my answer that I've put the next slide, one of the things that I feel is the arts. The arts, why, how does the arts fit into everything that we've just said? Introducing educational materials about all cultures, homeschooling access. Thank you, Emily. Yeah, absolutely. Because there is a space in which the arts allows us to do everything. It allows us, one, to acknowledge originality, to allow difference. When we were in art class, we were all told, okay, let's draw our family. No one drew everything exactly the same because our stories are not the same. And so for myself, as a photographer and as a filmmaker, there is a tremendous space in which I've been able to explore and share. On the next slide, slide 27, I'd like to share a quote from Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks, this is In Our Glory, Photography and Black Life, edited by Deborah Willis. She says, cameras gave to Black folks, irrespective of our class, a means by which we could participate fully in the production of images. It is essential that any theoretical discussion on the relationship of Black life to the visual, to art making, make photography central. Access and mass appeal have historically made photography a powerful location for the construction of an oppositional Black aesthetic. In the world before racial integration, there was a constant struggle on the part of Black folks to create a counter-hegemonic world of images that would stand as visual resistance, challenging racist images. All colonized and subjugated people who, by way of resistance, create an oppositional subculture within the framework of domination, recognized that the field of representation, how we see ourselves, how others see us, is a site of ongoing struggle. Thank you. I'd like to share the next slide. The next slide is from Gordon Parks. He says, I saw that the camera could be a weapon against poverty, against racism, against all sorts of social wrongs. I knew at that point I had to have a camera. When I started as a photographer, I didn't necessarily know all of that. Thank you. This is good. I didn't necessarily know all of the things that Bell Hooks was talking about or Gordon Parks. And my work as a photographer fed my work as a filmmaker. But I did understand that I wanted to be able to tell my story. Could I get a volunteer to read why this focus on activating the storyteller is so important? Would someone mind coming on and reading this for us? Thank you, Elizabeth.
Art focus, activating the storyteller. The mosaic and myriad of narratives that belong to Black, Indigenous, and people of color is the strength of our collective. These stories enrich us and help to counter the dominant ideas and theories that have been formulated in an attempt to explain our experiences. Our stories become a powerful tool in the broader context of society that can disrupt the dominant ideas that frequently frame BIPOC as victims and not as agents and authors of our own lives and liberation. Storytelling is an essential element in our work of promoting social justice and racial equity within our educational institutions, and more importantly, to dismantling racism in our society as a whole. As we work to make our institutions more representative of Black and other marginalized groups, it is imperative that we see the value in the lived experiences of these groups. Using storytelling in all its modalities, oral tradition, literature, film, and other mixed media, is meaningful to our understanding of how racism and oppression impacts us. It is vital that we amplify marginalized voices so that we can continue to disrupt systems of domination and oppression that undermine our progress and collective healing as a society. We ground our work as educators with the understanding that we must identify and understand how personal identities and biases impact our work with young people. To overlook, minimize, or erase stories of the Black diaspora is not only a diminishing of our collective truth, but also a loss to humanity as a whole.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So right now, we're in a crisis in the United States. We're in a tremendous crisis with the book bans that are happening. I mean, it doesn't even make sense to me, because when I grew up reading, I don't know, 1984, or reading different things where there was this projection that this could happen, or talking about it historically about what happened during McCarthyism, or all of the different places in which I grew up believing that I had freedoms and that many other people did around the world did not. But yet here we are, where books are being pulled off of the shelf, books that literally tell the American story. How can we grow as a nation? How can we grow our students, our society, if we actually are in denial of what has happened? I'd love to hear from any of you, if you'd like to come on the mic or just consider. There are many, many organizations. The Brooklyn Public Library is engaged in supporting young people around the country with access to books. But how do we see this ban? How can we as educators shift what's happening? Like and I don't know if everyone is from in New York. And so New York is not necessarily facing a book ban. But when we think about that this is happening on a national level, what are some of the actions that we can take? Thank you, Beth. Beth says blatant censorship, blatant racism. I mean, we're basically allowing on some level, our politicians to come into a very sacred space. There's book drives that we can create. We can share with the Brooklyn Public Library, definitely donate books to area censorship. Providing digital versions of books to students when books are banned. If there's one thing I'd like us to take away from our gathering today, is that we also have to be engaged. We cannot watch on the sidelines, because wherever it is that we stand, whether or not we are Black or a person of color, or part of the LGBTQ+ community, or a part of any of the communities that are being targeted or marginalized, or part of the immigrant community, or whether or not you're an English language learner, which I understand that many of us here are. This affects us fundamentally at a core. What the book bans and the ban against teaching historically relevant work creates a tremendous crisis for our young people today and for who they become. Thank you. Kim says create art workshops about those banned books and stories. Absolutely. Volunteering, tutoring, connecting local community advocacy with local state governance, connect communities on a grassroots level via book exchanges, reading groups, celebrations of literacy. Absolutely. Book clubs. I'd like us to find a way. Can we, engage with our local library, wherever it is that we are? And if we haven't read the book, it doesn't mean that someone else shouldn't be able to read the book. I think that I just want to put that forward. As a kid, the library was my favorite place to be. I was an English language learner. My family, as I told you, is from IET. And so English was my third language. My first was Creole, French was my second, and English was my third. But the library was like my favorite place to be. And so I just think that for myself, I know that I am engaged, and I encourage all of you to consider this, consider ways in which you can engage yourself and your community. Thank you, Crystal, for putting that in. We have such a wonderful group of people here. I want to hear a little bit more from y'all before we all go. You're a little bit quiet, but that's okay. So if we can go to the next slide. I've done a lot of kind of trying to share just a little bit before we get into the film. 4 key questions. What do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel? And what do I want to know? And then the next slide, it offers a little context. So the Fête de Vodou, the Vodou Festival, happens January 10th. It is a national holiday in Benin. When I was doing research for my project is called Brooklyn to Benin, a Vodou Pilgrimage. I was looking at the survival of traditional African religions throughout the Americas. From Brooklyn, where I live, throughout the southern parts of the United States, going to IET, and then going to Benin. Benin was key because Benin is the birthplace of Vodou. It was brought over by enslaved Africans to the Caribbean and the Americas. The Fête de Vodou is the celebration of traditional religions in Benin, and it's formerly called Dahomey. And it was President Soglo who inaugurated the first Vodou Festival in 1993 to rehabilitate the traditions and cultures of Vodou, practiced by a majority of Benin people and many throughout the African diaspora. His vision was to celebrate the humanistic value of the traditional religion that derived from sacred and ancient African spiritual systems, and to reclaim the identity and dignity of Black Americans. It became a national holiday on the 10th of January, 1998. I share this because Benin is the only country that I know of. If there's another one, please let me know, on the continent of Africa that has made a national holiday where banks are closed, schools are closed for traditional religion. What makes that significant is that just about every country on the continent of Africa, except Ethiopia, have been colonized. And what that means is that their language, their traditional language, is not the first language. It's not the language that's necessarily taught in schools. The religions, the indigenous religions, many are practiced, but they are not publicly acknowledged. And it's interesting when we consider that traditional African religion, if we think about where life began, and we know that it began on the continent of Africa. We know, whether we're calling on Dekenesh in Ethiopia or the newer remains that were found in South Africa, that is where life began. And so Vodou is actually a mother religion, and all the other religions of the world are her children. That may be a bit much for some of you to consider that, but actually, if we understand the history, that this is one of the first religions of the world. And so I'd like to share with you my film on slide 38, and I'd like us to consider, what do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel? And what do I want to know? thank you for putting that in the chat. All right, so let's dig in. Thank you. So I'd like us to get a moment to kind of speak with each other. And I want to give thanks. That was wonderful interpretation. Yeah, the music, thank you. Yes, the music was so beautiful. That was guitar by Derek Johnson. It just fit the scene so powerfully. I'd like us to go into breakout groups. Please don't jump off because we're in a breakout group. That, you know, as soon as someone says, "Oh, like, oh, I'm out of here," don't do that to us. We want to hear from you. We want to engage with you. We just need to find out if there's anyone that needs ASL interpretation, because we can make sure to have an interpreter in the room. Does anyone need ASL interpretation? Please raise your hand. All right. And so we're going to go into breakout groups, and we're going to consider the questions that we put forward in the beginning, right? What were those questions? The questions were, what do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel? And what do I want to know? You'll be in groups of about 4 to 5. And we're going to be in there for maybe about 10 minutes, maybe less. For about, maybe about 10 minutes. And then we'll come back and we'll gather and we'll talk. And so Kinsey has made our breakout groups for us. And I invite you to stay with us, not to check out, and engage and be able to speak with others about what you saw. And I just do want to acknowledge that we have one of the poets here with us. We have actually a couple poets with us, but we have Oshunyoyin Alake, who was the poetess of the poem that I shared earlier. And then we also have the magnificent Baba Ngoma here with us. So just want to acknowledge and say thank you for joining us. So we're going to go into our breakout. Yes, thank you. Very nice to have you here. And we're going to talk. We're going to talk with each other. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk together. So what do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel? What do I want to know? We'll be in groups of 4 or 5. Jump on into your breakout group.
I can open the rooms now, and just folks keep an eye out for the blue notifications that come up on the top of your screen. I'll be giving you some time checks there.
Thank you.
All righty, here we go.
So, how was that? Please share with us. Please come on the mic. You can put it in the chat if you want to, but look at these faces. I just want to hail you up and say, hi, everybody. Before you turn it off, hey, nice to see you. Thanks for coming through. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, what did we hear in the breakout room? Can anyone want to share?
Well, we kind of dominated this.
Amy?
We did it.
Is someone going? Because I can go.
Okay, sure.
Hi, my name is Farida. So in our breakout room, it just so happened that there were 3 of us that were connected somehow to Haitian culture. And we had someone from Japan, and I'm sorry, I didn't know where the other person was from, but had some connection with the Spanish roots, I believe. So as Haitians, we felt connected. We felt that we're seeing something that sounded familiar, that we heard about, and we wanted to know more about it because it depicts the more positive aspect of something that was often seen as negative. And we like the connection to nature. We were all able to relate to that as a group. And I thought it was very important that the person from Japan mentioned, or why am I speaking for the person from Japan? Sorry. I was speaking on behalf of the group, but if Soto, I think, or Sato, if you want to jump in, I invite the other people from my group to jump in. Sorry about that.
Sure.
Hi. Yeah, can you hear me? Thank you very much, Introduce.
Sure. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, yeah, yes. Just my comment is very few. I mean, I'm just to explain my country that we have a very few population holding a passport. Like 30% of the population hold a passport from my country. So I'd like to be the few person from Japan English speaker and educate myself to understand other more cultures, I think. So thank you very much today.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. For myself, as a daughter of IET, I grew up with mixed messages. I grew up with, as I told you, I grew up in the suburbs of Maryland. So if I mentioned Haiti, a lot of people back in the 70s and 80s, they thought I said Tahiti. They were like, Haiti, what is that? Where is that? What, you know? And so, and then if someone did know something, then a big part of my identity was trying to break through all of the negative stereotypes that they had heard about IET. And so that's one of the things that's key. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this presentation and sit and talk and gather with you is that when we think about representation, when we think about the significance of being able to tell our own story, that allows us to have our seat at the table, to have our feet firmly planted and to be grounded because we trust our narrative. We know whether it is true, whether it is not true. I'd love to hear from Courtney. You have your hand up.
Hi, happy to be here. In our group, we discussed seeing the arts as an access point into the divine, an access point into ancestral practice, seeing arts as something that is a tactile experience that anyone can engage with, even if you are not an artist in the capitalistic framework. If you can vocalize, you can participate in that spiritual activation. If you can feel rhythm, right? We have the constant rhythm of the heartbeat. That is a spiritual activation. There are all these access points in which we can have that divine key in a sense. And the arts are present across cultures, across religion. It is like the through line of like, no matter what the message is, there's going to be some song, there's going to be some dance, there's going to be some call and response.
Come on, yes.
Intersection of things that allow us to tap it. So we talked about seeing that. We talked about hearing people in community, hearing multi-voice group singing. We talked about hearing rhythm, drums. Again, rhythm being an inherent part of all forms of music.
Yes.
Inherently all forms of divinity in a sense then. Whether the experiment is to be arrhythmic and floaty or to be very sharp in its rhythmic quality. We in our group talked about feeling, I know for me, I talked about feeling familiarity. Yanisa, a person in our group, also spoke about that familiarity. There's something that is like deja vu about it, but it was not my experiential knowledge. So there's this kind of ancestral memory, and at the prospect of that ancestral memory, frustration, deep frustration at the fact that this isn't firsthand and experiential, that my experiential capacity was taken from me across generations. And now being in this path of feeling this pull towards reclamation, which leads me to what I want to know. And what I want to know is how to access and to deepen and to, you know, for me, I have ancestry that's split across the Caribbean and the American South. And in that, there are a lot of ways that traditional African religion has been frowned upon, suppressed, etc. And so being the kind of like woo-woo person in my family who's like, I kind of want to get more into this, I have no guiding points that are in the family unit. So suddenly it becomes about expanding to community at large, finding individuals across culture in settings such as this, in artistic practice, etc. But wanting to know how to deepen and how to distribute.
Courtney, thank you so much for sharing that, because there's a space in which everything that you said, I experienced as a young person. If you can imagine coming from Haiti and coming from a traditional culture, a powerful source of pride, first independent Black nation, freeing themselves of the chains of slavery. And then I didn't know that part of how they were able to do that was because of voodoo. It is because in making the Declaration of Freedom, they made a declaration that they would call on their African gods and their African ways of being. They could not be free if they continued the same way that they had before. You understand what I'm saying? Step outside of that and claim what they knew, their truth. And then our truth as Black and brown people is often made to be ugly, is made to be harmful, to be aggressive. What our work, what our space is to reclaim, but also be clear that you already have it. I want you to know that. All life begins in Africa. You are part of that DNA. The whole world is part of that DNA. But some of the world wants to be in denial. If we step forward in truth, then we don't have to deny who we come from. Like I said, voodoo is a mother religion. If we understand that life began on the continent, then we understand that traditional African religion is the mother. And at any point that you are worried or concerned, you pour libations. And you speak to those that, though you do not know who they are, you may not know their names, you may not know exactly, but you feel them because your DNA harks you to them. You understand?
Understood. And thank you for the affirmation.
Yes.
The through line is crystallizing and is powerful. Thank you.
Yeah, because we are our mother's people. We are our father's people. One of the biggest reasons why I wanted to do this work is because the shame that happens for Black folk tradition is actually is the bedrock of this country. If it was not for those who could interpret dreams, then how would we have the healing from the plant when our brothers and sisters were being lashed, okay, because they didn't pick enough cotton, that they didn't cut enough cane? Who healed them? How did we know those healing powers were on a land that we didn't know? Because we were connected to spirit. And it was through that connection that we received the message in dreams: go get this plant, go get this herb, go get this, and put a salve on those wounds. This work that I seek to do with all of you here today is to put a salve on those wounds.
To tap back in, it also makes you want to know, once we have excavated, dug up, reclaimed, how to go into redistribution and incorporating in my teaching artist practice, I have a lot of Black and brown students who, as far removed from this information as I may be, I can only imagine each generation without intervention becomes that much more removed. And how do we intervene and make sure that is then distributed, even if it's subtle, subliminal ways? It's like little breadcrumbs, is something that I'm curious about as well.
Thank you for that. I realize that, listen, y'all, I don't even know, spirit just came over me. So you have to understand that I'm speaking through spirit. I see the hand of Oshunyoin Alake, one of the poet the poet whose poem I read and one of the teachers that I have. Oshunyoyin, you'd like to speak?
Yes, I was listening to what you were saying about plants and herbs. And one of the things that happened, in particular in the Caribbean, a lot of the same plants that people had to use in Africa, they could find in the Caribbean and even some places down south. So they would have a dream and they would tell them, you know, they'd be told in the dream, you'll find this plant here, you'll find this plant there. There are a bunch of stories about how, especially in Louisiana, they found a lot of the plants they were used to using at home. You know, and you were talking about pouring libation and calling ancestors. That is, if you're really, really, really curious and you want to step into things, that's the first thing that we do, because our cosmogony runs like this. That is how we view the universe, runs like this. There's Almighty God. Then there is our ancestors. And then there are the divinities. We inherit everything to our ancestors, and that includes the divinities. So if you really want to step on that path, you set up an altar, a sacred space. That's what altar means. You set up a sacred space where you're saying to your ancestors, this is where I'm going to come to talk to you and to pray to you. And you ask them to put your feet on that spiritual path, and they will do it. And then after that, too, there's a lot of protection that takes place there, because once you've established that relationship and you understand how they're talking to you, no one, unless you're going to ignore it, no one can interfere with that. And you have the perfect first steps and guidance that you need to embrace who you are fully.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. Oh, thank you, Oshunyoyin. Thank you for joining the conversation. Prince, I see your hand, but one thing I have to say, the time is 11:27. The time is 11:27, so I want to acknowledge that. And I want to take these questions, and you can stay on. Can they stay on, Kenzie? Yeah, but I want to
stay on a few minutes. I just want to share that our ASL interpreters may have to hop off at 11:30, and that's okay.
Okay, got you. But what I put in the chat, and if we can go to slide 39, and I'm gonna take the two questions. I definitely want to hear from you, Afua. Thank you so much for having your hand still raised. For the questions that were asked, where can I, how, WaWaWa Diaspora Center is one of the sponsors for the African and Diasporic Religious Studies conference. I've put in the chat, I've put a link to the conference. This year is called Crafted from Clay, the Bodies, Disabilities, and Wellness in African Religions. You can join online, and you can be in person. It's going to be happening in North Carolina. I want to ask if you would like, because I am going to keep this chat, if you want to put something in the chat about what you saw, about what you heard, and about what you want to know. And I'd like to just take a moment just to share that with the film began with me in the water, because I'm a daughter of the water, right? From the Atlantic Ocean, right? This is a part of my history, my lineage. In taking the step to return to Africa was a part of breaking the spell that had been put on my ancestors and which they had passed on to me, which was a disconnection from Africa, a disconnection from things that were Black, a disconnection from traditional religion, a fear, ultimately a fear and hatred of myself. I was breaking that, the first in my family to return to our ancestral land, not of Haiti, but of Africa, Dahomey, Benin. And in making that return, my intention was, one, to be able to start again, to start fresh, to be able to move in a way that allowed me to be free of those negative things, really those fears that other people had of my ancestors, of me, fear that we would retaliate against others because of the way in which we had been treated. often in our unkindness, in their unkindness. And so a big part of this work is to heal. In creating the WaWaWa Diaspora Center and our programs, our intention is to work healing through the arts, right? Through exchange like this. I'm happy that you were able to speak with each other today. I'm happy that we were able to connect. And I'm happy that we are, if we can go to slide, oh, I think you put it in the chat already. All right, I think if we can go to slide 43, that would be great. And I will close with that. This is an image that I took in IET. It's called Sleeping Lion, Papa Legba at the Gate. In Vodou tradition, we open with Legba. We open with a prayer, a chant to the crossroads, seeking guidance, seeking opening between heaven and earth. And so in this space, I seek for us to open, asking Legba to open the way of greater understanding. When we hear about other traditions or ways of being that we do not know, let's not dismiss them. Let's not criticize. Let's engage. And if you're curious, then begin with the culture's arts, because in that space is true creativity and freedom. And so I just want to say thank you for joining today for this presentation on Black diaspora representation, the intersectionality of history, culture, and religion. It has been an honor. And I want to say thank you once again. And I am going to end there. It's 11:31. And so if anybody has to leave or anything, I understand. But I would like to take your question now, Akua.
We were in our group. We really looked at your film and looked at the female energy in the film, and some were not aware of Yoruba at all. My name Afua is Yoruba, and so the idea that priestesses are a huge part of the religion, and that's why you, of course, featured priestesses in religion. I mean, women, everyone on earth, was either birthed of a woman or is a woman. Yes. And we also talked about the idea that, well, in the diaspora of Africans all over the world, in the Americas, for example, there are Yorubas everywhere because the colonial boundaries are just colonial made. And so the tribe and the religion was all over. And so in terms of, I'm a college professor. And so in terms of teaching that continuum to the students in Songhai and Ghana and Mali and the understanding and how the art travels. Yes. And my personal experience is my mother went to Nigeria and picked up Benin masks. Because the art is spread all over. And so as a diaspora people, we need to be able to know that we can talk about the art of Cuba, the art of the Caribbean. My family's from the Caribbean. My ancestry is Benin. And so it is that, and I appreciate that from your film. And we all in the group talked about that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'd love to continue conversations with all of you. Please link up with me. My email is wawawadiaspora@gmail. You can find me on Instagram at regineromain.com. Send me a message. Let me know that you were a part of this. One of the things that we do is we do screenings. We have book discussions, book clubs. I've put in the chat a GoFundMe if you'd like to support the Voodoo Roots Project. And I'd like to sincerely acknowledge the New York City Arts Roundtable for their boldness, right, in being able to bring this artistic expression to all of you, right? There's a space in which we have to understand that part of our country, here, there, to the left, to the right, folks done gone crazy, right? So this conversation ain't happening everywhere, right? Like, let's keep it real and support organizations like this one. So thank you for registering. Thank you for being here, but also support organizations like this one so that we can gather. We can connect, we can learn, we can step out of what we know. We can hail up another culture, another way of being, because the arts is that is that thread, right? So I just want to say to my nephew Prince, thank you for joining. I'm sorry I couldn't take your one, but I love seeing you there, because just like you, I learned from our great aunt, right? I learned from her where other members of my family wouldn't talk, wouldn't share. There's always one of us that's willing to. So when someone asks you, open up, take a chance, you know, keep it real. And that's how we grow. So I say Ashe, Amen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It was wonderful seeing you here, and I look forward to us gathering again soon. Peace and blessings.
Thank you so much. I just want to say, Gigi, thank you so much for this morning. Being with you has been incredible, so transformative, affirming, exciting, inspiring, just beautiful. So thank you for taking the time to share your work with us and this incredible session. Folks, I will be sending you a follow-up email with this chat saved, a link to this video, and any other resources that we shared during the call. Look for that. And I just invite you to join us this afternoon at 4 p.m. for our very last virtual session of Face-to-Face 2023. It's going to be gender inclusive practices in theater education. So I hope we can see you at 4. I'm putting the schedule in the chat as well if you want to grab that and take a look. We also really hope to see you all in person on Wednesday and Thursday at Riverside Church in Manhattan this week. I did send out details for those of you who have registered for the in-person conference. I sent out details on Friday. If you did not receive that, please check your spam folder and reach out to me if you don't have it. I'll be sending them again, but I want to make sure that everyone has what they need. Otherwise, so much gratitude for you, Gigi, and for our ASL interpreters, Carlos and Drew, and for all of you folks for joining us. And we will connect with you again soon. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.